Previously on Press X Gaming.
Overall, it does feel and play like a game that came out 13 years ago, and as much as I would have liked the controls to be improved with the remaster, I can only hope the sequel is improved so much more. After I'd finally finished with Alan Wake Remastered, I came away feeling pleased that I had gone back to it, but honestly feeling like the remaster was a little lacking itself. It could have made the character models better or improved the controls somewhat. There have been better remasters of older games, and this one felt disappointing as a whole. Despite this though, the game is still great, the story is still amazing, and despite the rocky start I had with it, I did have a lot of fun on my second run of the game. I really appreciate the way that the game does such an excellent job of tying all of its parts into one cohesive theme, where everything from gameplay to graphics serve its narrative. It's also really good that this once Xbox exclusive is now on PlayStation, so more people can experience it. And now I'm more than ready to jump into Alan Wake 2, which I'll be reviewing next time.
Stay tuned for the thrilling conclusion. A sequel poses a difficult challenge in any form of media. You need to do something new and push the story forward, maybe recontextualize information or motives, or introduce new conflicts that may not have been planned for when you were writing the original. It needs to be fresh, but also familiar. For a good sequel, you need to balance innovation with nostalgia, without retreading the same story as you did before. This, I imagine, is especially hard when the original property came out over a decade ago and has developed a cult following, and you have decided to tie the sequel into a shared narrative universe with some of your other properties. This brave feat is exactly what Remedy Entertainment decided to do with Alan Wake when they set up the plots for a sequel as part of the DLC for their 2019 game Control. It was a bold move, but it paid off, and it generated a lot of hype and expectation for Alan Wake 2 before its release in 2023. So with finishing Alan Wake Remastered a few weeks ago, I jumped straight into the sequel, ready to take on the darkness of Bright Falls once more. It is an unavoidable fact that a lot has changed in the gaming landscape over the last 13 years since Alan Wake was first released on the Xbox 360. Survival horror has seen a renaissance of sorts, with the Resident Evil series of remakes and last year's Dead Space remake, and it seems like Remedy Entertainment has been paying attention to these games and absorbed the lessons it's learned from their success. The most obvious of these is the game's graphical fidelity. The graphics on display in Alan Wake 2 blew me away, even when compared to the incredible looking games I just mentioned. The character models look amazing, and the motion capture was perfect, capturing the emotiveness and movements of its actors in a way that really breathed life into each character. There are so many parts of the game where you get to see a character rendered in-engine next to or near a live-action character, and honestly, you can see how close technology is to reaching true photorealism. The environments are beautiful and detailed too, in a way that it's easy to get lost just looking around. The graffiti that fills every wall in the twisted version of New York that Alan must traverse, the little signs that have quotes from manuscripts of the first game that litter the sidewalks, the way that the paths bend and circle naturally around the rocks and trees of the woods around Cauldron Lake. It's a delight to just drink in the world around you as you explore, when you're safe to. The oppressive darkness of the original is back too, with an improved lighting system that the game uses to great effect. The darkness now feels more threatening and impenetrable than ever before, and there are moments of the game where the shadows from the torch you use genuinely set me on edge, worried that I'd seen a creature that was about to jump at me from the dark. There are also moments where you enter what's known as an overlap, an area between worlds, and the game uses these really well. The first one of these filled the area with a harsh red tone that stained everything around the main path, and it felt like I was stepping right into a horror movie. It feels like Remedy has learned some incredible things about the way they use colour and light when making Control, and it's in these overlaps that these lessons are the most evident. This tension is heightened by the soundtrack of the game as well. The ambient music and sounds you hear are always there, just helping the tension slowly build until it crescendos in a moment of combat or panicked sprinting to the light of a safe haven. The sound design is nerve-wracking. I hated the shades in New York that whisper Alan's name, sometimes sounding far away, sometimes right next to you, never sure if they will attack you or leave you unaccosted.
Wake.
Generally speaking, I'm usually pretty good with scary media. Jump scares aren't something that usually faze me, and the level of atmosphere and tension a game like Alien Isolation has is usually something I'm comfortable with. Alan Wake 2, however, made me jump more times than I can count. There are jump scares that happen quite often during the game as you explore and get closer to each chapter's finale, but generally it was the enemies that seemed quieter and more prone to sneaking up on you, and I found myself swearing at the screen a lot more than I expected to, as I'd got knocked over by a hostile shadow I had walked past and ignored, or was attacked by these creepy swimming taken that look like they have 4 arms that pop out of nowhere. And the sound design of the game is owed a huge amount of credit for making me feel that tense and on edge all the time. As a side note, while talking about the music and sounds the game has, the game's chapters are split up similarly to Alan Wake's, where each chapter has an ending screen with a song playing over it. I believe that this time they are all original pieces, and they are all brilliant. There are also a couple of new songs from the Old Gods of Asgard, a returning band from the original game, and their songs have been stuck in my head for days now, and are played at 2 of the best and coolest parts the game has to offer. In the original Alan Wake, it felt like there were only a few enemy types, and they are all very similar looking except for the birds and the poltergeists. Alan Wake 2 does a much better job differentiating its enemies, and how you deal with them depends on what you're fighting, unlike the first game which kinda had the same strategy for them all. One big change to the enemies is that not all of them need to have the shadow stripped from them before you can shoot them, but flashing them with a focus blast of light does stun most enemies for a short time, so it's always good to keep that in mind. This change is balanced by the torch not regenerating over time, and each flash uses a chunk of the battery instead of it slowly draining. There are still safe havens in the form of lampposts again, but these only stop enemies from seeing you, and they don't make enemies disappear anymore. This change makes enemy encounters a lot more tense, when you can see a group of them just waiting for you to step out of your hiding place. This is just one example of some of the huge changes to gameplay between the original and the sequel. Resident Evil has clearly been a huge influence on this title, with you now having the same inventory management as Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, and now there are safe rooms that you can find that let you store items in a shoebox and save your game, although no ink ribbons are needed here. You can find upgrades that let you increase your carrying capacity, and certain weapons will take up more space. One thing I did find was that I felt like I was running out of space a lot, especially when playing as Saga, who has charms that act as equipable little power-ups, but they do take up space when you find them and you haven't equipped them yet. There are also medical kits of various potencies to use, as the light doesn't heal you the same way it did in the original. As you may have just noticed, I mentioned a character called Saga, and this goes into the biggest change that there is in Alan Wake 2, that there are 2 playable characters. Alan Wake and Saga Anderson have their own areas to explore and specific gameplay mechanics to utilise. Alan Wake must traverse the Dark Place, attempting to escape again. To do this, he must write his way through the world, as his story directly affects the world around him. In gameplay terms, what this means is as you explore, you find scenes and plot points. A scene is a location, like a collapsed tunnel inside a subway. A plot point is a key term that you can find in the form of echoes that give Alan inspiration. And when you're inside Alan's writing room, you can combine these 2 things to make paths forward. For example, if you combine the collapsed tunnel scene with the murder cult plot point, the area will change, filling the space with an altar and perhaps a door leading to a new area.
The plot changed the details of the world.
Alan also has access to a fancy angel lamp that you get early on in the game that can steal light from one place and put it somewhere else. Much like the storyboarding, moving the lights changes the world around Alan, which opens up paths for him to push ever forward into the darkness. On the flip side, Saga Anderson, the newer addition to the cast, is an FBI agent, sent to Bright Falls to investigate a cult with her partner, who gets dragged into the story Alan is writing and forced to deal with the Taken that have started appearing back in Bright Falls. As an FBI agent in the real world, she cannot change the world around her the same way Alan does, but she does have access to her own mind palace. In here, she can put together clues on a corkboard or profile people she has met to learn more about their motives or what they are hiding. I found the profiling system to be very interesting, especially because of the way it is presented, as Saga sits in a chair contemplating a character's thoughts or motives, and a live-action version of that character paces behind her, talking to her, and it makes for some really interesting scenes. However, the caseboard feels shallow in comparison, where you mostly just click and drag pictures to the right space on the board. There are story moments where you need to fill in the board to progress the game, but most of the time it feels like pointless busy work, especially when compared with Alan's more interesting writer's board. For the most part though, the two sections of the game do play fairly differently. Mostly, Alan's chapters feel like puzzle solving, with combat being less common and less threatening overall, whereas Saga's chapters are a lot more action heavy. Combat is fairly regular with her, with enemies spawning randomly as you explore the areas around Bright Falls, and she also has the game's only boss fights. I didn't mind the separation for this too, as for most of the game you can freely swap between the two stories in safe rooms, so if you get bored of one style you can mix it up. Overall though, combat was definitely less common than in the original Alan Wake, but when it was forced upon you it did feel a lot more impactful. Each character's playable chapters are also quite different when it comes to trophies, with the majority of them coming from collectibles from Saga's side in Bright Falls and its surrounding areas. Thankfully, this is another huge improvement from the original. There are way fewer mandatory collectibles, and most of them are tied to small puzzles that you need to solve. The manuscripts obviously make a return from the original, and they are worth finding for their contents, but you do only need to find one of them for a trophy, which is unmissable anyway. Instead, you have lunchboxes to find, which also provide a currency to upgrade your weapons, so are worth seeking out regardless, cult stashes, which contain useful supplies or secrets, and these are usually locked with a hidden key or a puzzle that you need to solve to get into them. Then there are nursery rhyme puzzles, in which you need to find small dolls that are dotted around the world, then place them in specific spots around the rhyme to solve the puzzle. These always reward you with very useful charms. All three of these components, dolls, rhymes and charms, have a trophy for collecting them all. Lastly, there are the TV commercials to watch, and I am so happy that these are back, and these might even be better than Night Springs episodes of the original, due to the fantastic acting of Peter Franzen of Vikings fame, who plays both of the Koskela brothers.
That I'm lost in the woods. You've only had a tour guide, also. It's bear season. Oh no, a bear. Help. Did somebody call for a tour guide? Oh wow. Koskela Brothers Adventure Tours. Unforgettable tour experiences at affordable prices. That's right. I'm Ilmo Koskela, voted best coffee roaster / tour guide by Coffee World magazine, and I'm here to give you the tour of a lifetime. But Ilmo, I've heard the government has seized and restricted access to many local nature attractions. That is true, Jaakko. Many local attractions have recently become fenced off by the government, and that's why at Koskela Brothers Adventure Tours we say, fuck the government. We have bolt cutters. Oh wow, you think of everything, and we'll take you anywhere.
In the Dark Place, Alan has other things that he needs to collect. There are words of power dotted around the world that can be used to upgrade his gear or his abilities, but only one of these is actually needed for a trophy. The only other collectibles he has that you need to look out for are the Writer's Journey videos, which play on TVs you can find in the areas, and they're not even that really hidden or out of the way for the most part. The game also has trophies for finding each of the weapons for both characters, and using all of the small consumable tools like rocket flares, flashbangs, or explosives to kill enemies. Overall, the trophies aren't that hard to get, and the game makes it very clear when there's a point of no return, and no collectible is missable before that point. It's a nice thing when trophies don't stand in the way of a game itself by making you do unnecessary things, and they're just an added bonus on top of something useful to pick up in the game. I would recommend following a guide to help you find all the collectibles, so your journey to the Sisu trophy will be a smooth one. There is also a trophy for petting a dog that you can meet in the town of Watery just before the point of no return, so that's a win in my book. So finally, let's talk about the part of Alan Wake 2 that I think is truly outstanding. As you would expect, the story of the two protagonists are naturally linked throughout the narrative, but for the most part, you can choose which story to follow until the game forces you to finish both just before the finale. Both sides are equally brilliant though. I don't want to spoil the story as it's something I think is best experienced for yourself, but I will say this. Alan Wake 2's narrative is so clever and so fun to follow as it goes down the rabbit hole that even when it lampoons itself for its use of tropes or use of metafiction, it always felt earnest and believable. Its constant use of different types of art and media, referencing other movies or books or even Remedy's previous titles, act to constantly remind the player that they are part of the fiction just as much as Saga and Alan are. It pushes you to ask what's real here, what's part of the story that Alan is writing, how much is being corrupted by the dark presence, blurring the lines between the reality of the world and the fiction of it. There is so much to unpack in the story of the game, especially with the small added scenes from the final draft update, that I know I will be reading and theorising on what everything means and wondering where the story will go next in the DLC that's planned to come out later in 2024. In my Alan Wake Remastered review, I said that my favourite part of that game was how well the game ties all of its parts together to serve its narrative, and Alan Wake 2 is exactly the same. The way the story loops and spirals around Alan's story is so interesting, so obvious in its message, and also so vague at the same time that I feel like I still don't understand everything I played through. All I can say is, I loved every dark, twisted turn of it. The original Alan Wake ends with Alan saying, "It's not a lake, it's an ocean," as he comes to his grand realization about the dark place, and this mirrors how I feel about the two games. If the original Alan Wake is a beautiful dark lake, its sequel is an ocean, more expansive, more impressive, and more encompassing in every way. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this Alan Wake double billing that we've been through. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing for more Platinum Hunting reviews. Let me know what you think of these games down in the comments, and check out pressxgaming.com for written reviews and more. Until next time, happy hunting.